In that case, everybody's here, and I'd like to welcome not only our host, Maria Tyson, my colleague from here in Wageningen, but also our panelists, and indeed everybody in the audience. For today's last session, we're going to be taking a look at how seed system development is embedded in One CGIAR. And given I suppose that it's a bit of a hot topic, there are probably many questions going to come forward in the chat. This might be a bit of a longer session, so we'll go up until an hour from now, rather than the 50 minutes constraint we've held everybody else to. I wish you all a very enjoyable discussion, and Maria, over to you.
Thank you very much, James. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending from where you're joining in the world, to this last session for today. My name is Maria Tyson. I'm a seed systems advisor at Wageningen University and Research. And together with David Spielman, I'm hosting this session. David is a senior research fellow from IFPRI. And then we have a panel consisting of Ian Barker, the program director or a program director at SID, Carlo Fada, the director of research of the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. We have Alessandra Galli, who's a team leader in gender at ILWI. And later on, I will ask you to introduce yourselves as we come to you for questions in the panel. We all know that CGIAR is in a reform process towards One CGIAR. So currently there's still 15 independent research institutes. This seems to be quite a big reform process with a lot of implications. And I imagine that you joining us here as seed sector professionals, you're really interested, like, what does that mean? So what is this reform process all about? And how is seed part of it? What does it mean for seed of crops, but also propagation materials for livestock and forages? And especially, what does that mean for my collaboration with CGIAR, this whole reform process? I think we have a high-level panel here today, but I still would like to put a disclaimer, because we don't have CGIAR management responsible for the reform process, but colleagues who are deeply involved in it. But I'm sure that they can enlighten us today about the direction it is going. I will lead you through a number of questions with the panel, but I encourage you to also put your questions in the chat, and I can imagine that you have a number of questions. First, I would like to start with David. David, can you please unmute yourself, and can you please introduce yourself? And then as well, give us a short introduction to this CGIAR reform process. Why is this reform needed, and what does it entail? And what is the role of seed systems under One CGIAR, the way you see it? David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Maria has introduced me already, I'll just say that I'm with the International Food Policy Research Institute, and I'm based here in Kigali, Rwanda. I also have the pleasure of being a co-convener of the CGIAR Community of Excellence for Seed Systems Development, which was created last year in an effort to keep seed systems development squarely on the agenda of the One CGIAR reform process. We benefit from anchoring this community in 3 programs that share a common interest in the topic. That's PIM, the CGIAR Research Program on Policies, Institutions, and Markets, ISSD Africa, which is hosting this conference, and the Netherlands CGIAR Seed Systems Development Research Program. Maria Tyson actually is one of my co-conveners of this community. So with that background, it's obvious that we care a lot about seed systems in the CGIAR. And at the same time, many of you have heard that we're going through this massive reform process. And you're probably wondering what's going on, as Maria mentioned. I should point out that as a relatively low-level CGIAR insider, who is involved in several of these reform processes going on, I can tell you that I myself am still trying to figure out what the reform is all about. If you go to the website for CGIAR, there's a very clear statement. One CGIAR is a dynamic reformulation of CGIAR's partnerships, knowledge assets, and global presence, aiming for greater integration and impact in the face of the interdependent challenges facing today's world. So, you know, it's really been a long time coming, this CGIAR reform. It's here, it's now, and let me tell you, it is moving fast. An important aspect of this process is reorganizing CGIAR science into 3 action areas: an action area on genetic innovation, an action area on resilient agri-food systems, and an action area on what we call systems transformation. Alongside of that, there are several regional initiatives, and in the context of this conference for Africa, there's the West and Central Regional Initiative, as well as the East and Southern Africa Regional Initiative. What I can say about the One CGIAR process is this: thanks to the collective and individual efforts of many, many people, I am pretty confident that seed systems development is squarely on the One CG agenda, and that the CG's wealth of experience and its long-standing partnerships with both national research systems and centers, as well as private sector seed companies and other types of entities, as well as non-governmental and civil society organizations, will shape the design of One CGIAR's approach to this agenda. Now, some of my colleagues from other programs and centers will talk about some of the specifics, but suffice it to say that we have a strong set of initiatives coming together that address multiple dimensions of the topic of seed systems. Now, some people might say, you know, are you diluting CGIAR's attention to seed systems by having multiple initiatives, you know, multiple programs and projects, rather than, say, concentrating it into a single initiative? I have to say, from where I sit, I find that the inclusion of seed systems development in multiple initiatives, in multiple ideas and programs that are taking shape right now, is actually quite encouraging. Of course, we all recognize that there are different perspectives on the topic. There are, as Ian Barker and I like to say, different worldviews. And our goal is really to respect these perspectives and make them an essential part of what we do in CGIAR. Now, there are risks. You know, the strategy could devolve into multiple and separate camps within One CGIAR with competing perspectives on what seed systems are and what they should be. And that could be fueled, for instance, by competing donor perspectives who want to compartmentalize what we do. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the donors understand the inherent risks in compartmentalizing it. And that's why communities like ISSD, or our community of excellence, or just those linkages between scientists and other practitioners and actors are so important, because we bring together multiple perspectives on the topic, and we ensure that no one worldview or strategy dominates, and that scientists learn to communicate across their disciplines, specializations, and perspectives. And that ultimately leads us to an integrated approach to seed systems development with the CGIAR going forward. And I'll just close by saying that honestly, I think we in the CGIAR are in closer communication on ideas, perspectives, and research on seed systems development than we ever have been in the past. And with participation in ISSD and many other initiatives, I hope we can only get better with this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for this very nice introduction to One CGIAR. I'm happy that you believe in it and that seed has a central place in it and even comes out more strongly than it did before, because that's immediately a question, why seed reform? But I think we come to that when we go through the different questions with the different panelists, but also that there is space for different perspectives on seed, and that you're looking for partnerships and partners to join to shape initiatives around seed. Let me now go to Ian Barker. Ian, can you please unmute yourself? Can you please introduce yourself? And then I also have a question for you. David mentioned already the action area of genetic innovation. And I can imagine that there are breeders among our audience. And if as a breeder you look at that One CGIAR reform process, what does it mean for me as a breeder? What does it mean for the partnership I already have with CGIAR? What is new? What is different? Can you please explain this to us?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Maya. And yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm Ian Barker. I'm currently the Global Program Director for the Potato Agri-Food System at the International Potato Center, that's SIP. But within the context of this One CG reform process, I'm also the leader of one of these initiatives that make up this new science portfolio that David mentioned. And that particular initiative is called Seed Equal, and it relates to obviously provision of seed, better seed, originating, as you say, from, and hence your question, from the CGIAR and NARS breeding networks. So this initiative, Seed Equal, sits within this one of the three action areas that David mentioned, the genetic innovations action area. Now that action area includes the gene banks, it includes the breeding, the CGIAR NARS breeding networks. This particular initiative obviously is really looking at, if you like, delivering a return on that investment in breeding and making sure that the fantastic products of plant breeding, crop breeding in particular, in the broader sense, not just yield, but genetic gain in the broader sense of that, better nutrition, gender sensitive traits, etc., will reach farmers. And that's really the focus of this particular initiative. This particular initiative, I should just say, actually, by the way, it does arise from all that excellent work. I mean, David mentioned this, seed system community of excellence that ISSD is involved with, and Wageningen. And so, if David's wish was that seeds, is well represented in this reform process, I think we can say that you in the community of excellence succeeded, and seed is well representative. And I'm also very positive, and optimistic about this reform process. Also a believer, in your words, Maya. I can see working together, but this idea of the centres coming together and looking at these new issues that address us all is obviously the way that we should go. So back to your question, what does it mean if I'm a NARS breeder? And I think one of the things that we very much look at in this initiative and in the reform process in general, if you like, is restating and revitalizing this relationship between the CG and the national programs. It's always been there, but I think one of the things we're looking at the start of this process is trying to define actually what we call the comparative advantage of the CG. That also implies what is it the CG shouldn't do, right? And at the heart of this, I think, is this principle of subsidiarity with the national programs. And so that I think revitalizing, restating that relationship is actually really critical going forward. And in particular, we looked at a number of areas we think that we I mean, it's not as though that seeds is a new area to the CG, so some of this is continuity, but we're also interested in new areas. One of the areas we're very interested in is working with national programs and looking at new models of what we call advancing varieties. We do think that sometimes varieties are launched on the market, if you like, that have not been properly characterized, that we're not really, sometimes I guess the criticism could be it's too much technology push, not enough listening to farmers, understanding farmers' needs, understanding the wider market. Some farmers are obviously producing for formal markets and understanding market needs. So it's really taking a more of a demand-led view, understanding what markets and farmers, and including disadvantaged groups. I should say in the Seed Equal initiative, we're very much also interested, it's not just delivering the benefits of plant breeding, but delivering them to all disadvantaged groups, including women, is a very key part of the initiative that we're developing. So I think training and capacity building, new tools, is what we would like. We are developing new tools and want to introduce those to national programs. So a large part is capacity building and training in identifying better varieties, more suited to markets and farmer needs. So for example, an expansion of on-farm testing, we would see as quite an important part of this. We often identify the bottlenecks, say, at the provision of early generation seed. So we're very much interested in more training on early generation seed business models, new technologies for multiplying crops, for rapid multiplication techniques for crops. If we can multiply crops faster and cheap, include the multiplication rates. That's a very important area on this. Also, interestingly, we've been working with national programs on things like licensing. I think we need to work together on national program partners and how we build strong partnerships with other downstream partners who may be able to help us on this journey of multiplying seeds, like local seed companies. So a more uniform and a more homogenous, say, things like a licensing policy, and maybe even, you know, we've actually started work on, for example, returning royalties that could be legitimate, you know, back to national programs. So could we look at even more sustainable funding mechanisms, you know, for national program breeding, and returning some you know, income to them. So I guess that would be the three areas I think would be the highlights, I think, of this work in terms of national programs.
That sounds great, Ian. I'm really happy to see that you make this closer link to what do we really supply in relation to varieties, what farmers want and need, and what markets want and need. I think this licensing issue is a very important one, but also EGS, which is bottleneck in the value chain, and has already been discussed also in one of the other conference sessions. So business models for EGS. So that's great. But then I think, what about private sector? If I would be the owner of a domestic seed company, how could I collaborate with One CGIAR, or does anything change? So what do you expect from private sector in Africa? And what can private sector expect from One CGIAR?
Yeah, no, that obviously. So then again, it's worth saying it's not directly from us. We look at this as a sort of a breeding network between. It's really the partnerships. It's what could the private sector expect, local private sector expect. I can't even say it, from these NARS NARS CG networks, crop networks, breeding networks, if you like. And it may not be. It could include, as David said, these could be, you know, NGOs interested in seed production. They could be community-based seed multipliers. But those downstream actors, that we want to leverage their skills and expertise in getting the seed to the farmer. And again, I think what they need from us, and again, we have looked at, I was involved in a study with the Crops to End Hunger group, for example, and we produced something. We're about to launch a white paper on July the 15th through an AgriLinks webinar, if I can give some publicity to that event. And that did identify some bottlenecks facing, if you were a local SME seed company. And those bottlenecks relate to capacity themselves of those seed companies, an enabling environment, policy environment. You know, they often work with governments, you know, who are purchasers of seed. You know, could we make the government a more smart seed purchaser in those sort of areas like that? They need some of that some of this business itself is risky. So can we, you know, are there mechanisms to de-risk, you know, them investing in these businesses? And guess what? Back to early generation seed, Maya. It also is an issue for, it's an issue for NARS. It's an issue for them. We hear that, you know, many times, particularly for smaller companies that maybe don't have, and those smaller companies that don't have an R&D capability, they traditionally look to the CG as for a source of, or our NARS partners, I should say, you know, as a source of germplasm and new varieties. So again, back a licensing strategy, and hopefully from this one, you know, we did hear from seed companies who knocked on the door of different NARS and different CG centers and don't always get the same story, you know, and that's an area where I think we can come up with a more uniform sort of policy, so that again, we can characterize the material coming out of our breeding programs, that it is better suited to markets and what farmers need, and hopefully that we can incentivize, but also make it more efficient, that handover to these partners, like say a local seed company. But of course, it's always worth saying that you know, what can we expect from an SME seed company? You know, that is very context dependent. I mean, obviously, depending on, as we all know, the who does what question in terms of who's producing early generation seed, who's marketing, who's producing. That's very context dependent, as we all know, on the type of crop and where we're talking about, and the state of the seed sector development in a given geography. So the who does what question is actually critical, and it is very context dependent. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. I think that was a clear answer, but it's clear that seed producers, be it domestic companies or local seed businesses, play a key or have a key role to play in getting varieties out to farmers.
For sure.
And it's great to hear that you are going to work on that and look at capacity, at enabling business environment, etc. But I see also a question in the chat, so I would like to move now to Carlo. So Carlo, can you please introduce yourselves? And now we move to the action area from the action area genetic innovation to resilient agri-food systems. And can you, after introducing yourself, please explain how seed systems will be addressed under that action area? And what role do you foresee for community-based organizations under this action area, or seed under this action area? Because somebody
thank you.
in the chat, could you elaborate how One CGIAR would handle the balance between formal and informal seed supply system? And I think somehow this relates to how seed is addressed under this action area. The floor is yours, Carlo.
Thank you very much, Maria. And it's really great to be here. So my name is Carlo Fata. I'm director of the research area on biodiversity for food and agriculture in the Alliance of Biodiversity and SIA. And I'm also leading an initiative on nature positive agriculture, where also Wageningen University and is part of developing that proposal. And so let me answer this question. So I think the RAFS, so the Resilient Agri-Food System, is really about intervention on the ground with the farmers. And it's a very diverse set of portfolio, spanning from approaches like sustainable intensification, nature positive agriculture, excellence in agronomy, and then a number of a little bit more specific like livestock system, fish system, etc. So it goes into kind of broad spectrum initiatives to more specific initiatives. Now, obviously, and depending on where we have where the farmers are and what they are in, they need reproductive material, they need genetic material, being it for livestock, for fish, for crops, for trees, if they want to use agroforestry system, or if they want even to use for restoration purposes. And many times this reproductive material is not available to them, it's not commercial. And so, as we know, for the majority of the crops in the majority of the countries in the South, the material comes from informal seed system, at times 100%, but even 90%, and even sometimes for major crops, it comes from informal seed system. So this is very important for the farmers, particularly the smallholder farmers. And I think in the RAFs, acknowledging the fact that it is important that to have access to this material is one part of it. In the initiative on nature positive agriculture, which really looks at how one can use integrated approach and biodiversity for food and agriculture to enhance the production, productivity, resilience, nutrition, biodiversity, because we sometimes forget about the biodiversity crisis, but that is a very serious one. And so how we can move into a system which is more diversified and where this material is available to the farmer. So in the nature positive agriculture, but also in other initiatives, there is a very strong seed system component, which will complement what Ian just described, and hopefully will also trigger the development of local seed initiatives and small and medium enterprise, which are locally based and which can provide the farmers within their communities with material that is locally adapted and it's therefore best fit for the purpose of the farmers themselves. It of course this knowledge is generated through participatory action research. So the idea of having this marketing intelligence, the idea that farmers can contribute to identify which material is best fit, improve it, create the early generation seed, working with the NARS, and then provide high quality seed through local seed systems. So I think that part will be an important part, not only of the nature positive initiative, but it will also link to other initiatives within the RAFs.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlo. Actually, you answered already my next question. It's more about which partnerships do you need? Because you mentioned that, the farmers are central, but we need to work with local seed multipliers. But could you So what innovations do you really need? So especially in the context of One CGIAR, what innovations are you looking at in this area of sustainable use of genetic resources? What's really new?
I think what we really, I mean, it's probably something that is not really new in strict sense, but it's something that has been, so it has not been mainstream. So that, for example, that participatory approach, putting farmers as potential partners for the research, that is definitely an innovation. But I think also the whole idea that seed system is not only important for, I mean, the seeds and the material that you produce, and having a resilient production system is not just something that is relevant for the farmers, but is relevant also for the environment and sustainability. So I think a new set of partners that we are looking here are investors, are people that can invest on sustainable agriculture, on environment, on zero, for example, zero emission agriculture, zero deforestation agriculture. So an approach that embraces diversity as a mechanism for reducing the net greenhouse gas emission. If we consider the four major crises, the global crisis, the triple burden of malnutrition, the biodiversity crisis, and the land degradation crisis, and if we think that we can achieve, I mean, I think they are somehow all interrelated. They're all related to practices that are not sustainable and needs to be reversed. Now, in that initiative, we believe that nature positive agriculture can be part of the solution. Sustainable intensification is obviously part of the solution. And so what we need is really to transform markets. Markets tend to uniformity. We promote diversity. How can these two words come together? How can the diversity that we want in production system be available to the market? Because at the end of the day, you know what? We always talk about the famous 500 million smallholder farmers that produce 80% of the food that is eaten in the South. And these farmers are by large and far disconnected from the market, because sometimes they are custodians of that diversity, custodians of the seeds. And so the governments are pushing these farmers to commercialize. I think the bet is to make sure that they commercialize with their own genetic diversity, with their own species, their own crops, their own animals, their own fish. Not that they adapt to markets that are uniform, but that the markets adapt to that diversity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlo, also for making the link to sustainability, which is a key word in many of these agendas related to the global crises that you mentioned that we are in. And I'm happy to hear that this is still an important topic under One CGIAR, because eventually everything has to link back to sustainable food systems. Thank you. Alessandra, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, Maria. Hi, everybody.
Okay, hello. Please start with introducing yourself, and after that I have a question for you, because we talk a lot about crop seed systems. But could you tell us, because you're from Italy, what support is needed to ensure that farmers get access to quality seeds or quality propagation materials, for example, of livestock and forages also?
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. So I'm Alessandra Gallier, and I lead the gender team at ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute. Thank you for inviting today. So yes, Maria, you're very right. Usually when we think of seed systems, we mostly think about crops. But we have been putting some effort lately in also including livestock and forages together with fish and trees and so on in seed systems. And this is, for example, part of the CGIAR Community of Excellence on Seed System Development that David and Maria, you have already introduced. So why would we do that? Why would we think of or include livestock and forages in seed systems? Well, seed systems as an approach really helps to think holistically about a commodity. And of course, also about the technological and institutional innovation packages that come with that technology. So it really, I think, helps you look holistically at how rather than the silos focus, like look at the whole picture. How can we make this commodity, this livestock breed, from the development all the way to utilization of it? How can we make it work? How can we achieve better impact? So indeed, there are challenges in the sense that integrating livestock in a seed system approach shows differences. Crops are different from livestock and fish and so on. But then again, also different crops have different situations, and also the context is always quite different. So yes, we are aware that there are differences between livestock and crops, for example, but we also know that there are commonalities. So we want to understand what are the differences and what are the commonalities, because we really want to exploit the commonalities across, commodities in seed systems to understand how we can better achieve the 5 One CGIAR impact areas, which are nutrition, poverty, climate, environment, and gender. And then I want to focus on the gender component, because this is what we do in the One CGIAR gender team. The One CGIAR has a big a group of gender scientists working on a number of issues. And so Maria, you mentioned farmers. This is indeed something we focus on. First of all, we ask the question, who are these farmers? How do their needs, preferences, and opportunities vary? Based on gender, based on age, for example. And the key question is really, what seed system can support this diversity so that everyone can benefit in equitable ways, so that we can have, equitable outcomes from seed systems. So, farmers, yes, which farmers, how can we support them, and so on. And then it's also trying to go beyond this issue of access to quality seed. It's also looking at, control and benefit. So again, that we have gender equitable outcomes from seed systems. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Alessandra. And I think you touched already upon an issue that I wanted to discuss with you also about gender and youth and the transformative roles of seed systems can play. Can you add a bit on that?
Sure. Thank you, Maria. This is again a very interesting question. So, in the work that the gender work that we have been doing in the CGIAR in the last years, we've been working on integrating gender considerations into our research as a means, for example, to ensure that seed systems are more effective. So we were asking questions such as what livestock breeds would women and men like, so that they're more likely to be adopted. Well, lately, within the gender community of the CGIAR, we've really been pushing for a paradigm shift, a new way of thinking about this. It's not anymore gender considerations as a means to enhance the effectiveness of seed system. Is the other way around. Is how can we leverage seed systems, as a means to progress toward gender equality? So to give you an example, this would mean something like, how can a new livestock breed create new business opportunities for women's empowerment? So it's really a shift in the paradigm. And I can also give you a practical example. We have a project called Women in Business, Seed Dissemination in Ethiopia and Tanzania. This is supported by the NWO. And the project is very much looking at how we can disseminate improved breeds of chickens that are locally relevant and gender responsive. How can we disseminate them to reach women farmers in the remote areas? And we are doing that by supporting young women vet graduates who become our vendors. So they will, bring the chicken together with the package of intervention and bring it to the women farmers, and then they create a bit of a market around these chickens. And we do that by supporting the women through a gender responsive business incubation process, and also integrating or engaging with gender transformative approaches to ensure that we can create a conducive environment for these women to thrive in their business. So in this case, it's really, chicken seed systems to support women's empowerment and progress toward gender equality. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Alessandra. This is very interesting. Also, your comment that we need to turn the picture around and realize the potential of when we involve women in business and what they can contribute to agriculture and how everybody will benefit. And thank you for this nice example. I would like to go back to David now. David, because the other One CGIAR action area that you mentioned, the third one is systems transformation. And could you elaborate how seed systems development through system innovation could contribute to the major impact areas of 1CG? And then specifically with a focus on policies, investments, and programs needed to achieve impact at the level of nutrition, poverty reduction, inclusion, climate change, and environmental health?
Sure, sure, that's a great question. So, seed systems, again, it shows up throughout the One CGIAR reform agenda. I think everybody's done a great job on keeping seed systems on that agenda. So it does show up in this work on systems transformation. And systems transformation, is this very broad sort of conceptual idea of what happens to societies and economies as agriculture, for instance, becomes a smaller share of the economy, but the agri-food system becomes a larger source of growth and value in the economy. And as people, as farmers, for instance, become urban laborers, or as people migrate from rural areas to cities, all of the changes that go on, and especially the policies and the investments needed to steer that change process towards desirable welfare outcomes for people and for society. That's what systems transformation is all about. So agricultural policies in general still play a big role when we talk about systems transformations, and seed systems policies and regulations and investment priorities are part and parcel of that. And many of us, many of you on this call, many of you working in seed systems, that one of the more controversial topics is seed subsidies, for instance, right? How much public spending should be allocated to subsidizing the production or the use of seed, whether it's subsidizing bank loans or equipment imports for seed producers, or whether it's about reducing the price and making seed more affordable to farmers with subsidies. So that's one of those classic questions that we ask, right? And it's a policy question. It's a systems transformation question, because there are fundamental trade-offs. If you subsidize, for every bag of seed you subsidize, that's one less notebook or one less injectable that, in a school or a health clinic that you can also subsidize. There are fundamental trade-offs. So, keeping those things in mind, above sort of the biophysical science of seed systems is this question of, what are the right policies, or what are sort of the best fit policies and investments and choices that governments and society have to make on seed systems development. And there are lots of other examples that everybody else can think of, I'm sure, along those lines. So that's something, so those are the kind of issues that seed systems or systems transformation will approach when tackling seed systems. Of course, seed is not the only systems transformation issue that needs to be tackled. There are so many other things that matter: social protection, family and gender and youth policy, agri-food systems innovation policy, and just economic growth and social equity issues. So anyway, that I think addresses the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Good to hear that also seed is addressed in systems transformation under One CGIAR. And indeed, systems transformation is more than just seed systems transformation. So thank you for providing us with this picture. Please stay on. In the beginning, when we started, you mentioned this One CGIAR community of excellence in seed systems development. Would you like to explain a bit more about this community of excellence? And I think we have a slide also. James, can you put on the slide?
All right, there's our webpage for the community of excellence for seed systems. So this has been sort of a 2-year initiative designed to do exactly what we're doing today, and that's That's to discuss and keep seed systems development on the One CGIAR agenda. And we've been fortunate to have support from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands to do this work through PIM and in partnership with ISSD and NVO through their program on the Netherlands CGIAR, Seed Systems Development Research Program. So what we've been doing really, I think, is pressure testing a lot of the ideas we have. Alessandra, for instance, has been working on this question of, well, how do we approach gender and seed systems? Can seed systems development be transformative, gender transformative, rather than simply being just, gender sensitive? Carlo has been spearheading a lot of the work on, how seed systems development relates to the very ideas he discussed earlier for nature positive agricultural growth and development. And Ian has come in as a contributor to guide us on thinking about, demand-driven seed systems. We've done a lot of work on thinking about those commercialization pathways that are much more responsive to the demands of different types of farmers in different contexts. So we've been doing a lot of work to sort of bring those ideas together, create background materials for the various communities that we circulate in, and really, getting good ideas on the table. There's also been a group working on policies and regulation, working with me and Zaudi Bishao at ICARDA. There's also been a group thinking about, how do we redefine our partnerships with national research systems, right? Because they are the essential partner in making CGIAR successful. And their capacity to absorb both science and resources and to really get the job done is our, as much, our opportunity as our problem. I mean, we need to be thinking more about that. We have in the CGIAR, I think, maybe lost sight of our national partners in many, many ways over the years. And we need to change that, and we need to change that discourse. So all of these topics have been something we've been working on, and through forums like this and through conversations, with the One CGIAR design teams on these action areas we talked about, these initiatives we talked about, we've been trying to help move things along in the right direction. It's been a real pleasure, and I think ultimately what we're looking at is just creating those bonds across the different worldviews, the different scientists, the different partners and practitioners interested in seed systems, so that we can all have informed conversations and learn from each other and keep some continuity in what we do as the CGIAR reforms advance.
Okay, thank you very much, David. So I encourage everybody to visit the webpage and to get further information. And thank you also for emphasizing the need of partnerships and involving others in this whole process. Let's have a look at some questions in the chat. Maybe Alessandra, I think somebody in the chat remarked like, but crop seed systems, they are so different from animal seed systems, and yeah, how can you compare them? What are commonalities? And then somebody else remarked, yeah, if you talk about last mile approaches, probably for eggs or semen, it's the same as for crop seeds. Alessandra, can you explain a little bit more about this?
Yes, so thank you for the question, and thank you, Esther, also jumped in to support with the explanation indeed. So I do think we can think about it exactly the way Esther has described it. So with the plant, with crops, you have a seed that travels around. So when you think of dissemination, you just think of the bag of seeds that gets transported in whatever type of market. With livestock, you have two types of dissemination. You have either the artificial insemination, which in fact is really seed that travels and then gets to the farm and gets utilized on the spot. Or, for example, in the case of the chicken, you have the animal that travels. So the actual, the actual seed happens at the multiplication of the private company's level. And then, it's actually the improved chicken that travels, the improved breed. But it's essentially the same idea, is that you have an improved, you have in livestock an improved breeds, in crops you have an improved variety, and it's the same idea. How do we disseminate this technology together with the innovation, the institutional innovation, how does it travel? How do we get it to the people who need it most? How can these people benefit, and everything that we said before? I hope this is clearer now. It takes a bit of a shift, but it's very, very, it's very appropriate, I think.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Alessandra, for this explanation. I would like to go to another question now, which somehow has been addressed, but I would like to go a little bit deeper. And it's a question to Carlo as well as to Ian. I first go to Ian and then to Carlo. Somebody says, okay, the seed charts and how seed is positioned will be different in One CGIAR, but what does it really mean from the seed user perspective? So Ian, can you say something more about this? Please unmute yourself.
Good point, Maya, unmuted. Yeah, no, I wish it was, part of me wishes it was just moving the chairs around, but it's a very big reform. And actually that's the exciting part of it. You know, we are talking about merging 13 centers. You can imagine we have the opportunities to, you know, to bring diverse work on diverse cereal crops together for the first time, diverse legumes together for the first time. RTB crops, the RTB community has somehow had some experience of working together, but not the other crops. So it is a fairly fundamental reform. So what's different? Yeah, no, we hope, I mean, that we had this mantra. One of the things we talk about, fewer, better varieties, you know, better characterized varieties. So you know, we spend a lot of time promoting varieties, which I don't think have been, you know, properly characterized, and we may be registering too many varieties too early. So it will mean fewer, much better characterized, hopefully varieties better suited to markets. Hopefully we address some of these long-standing issues around early generation seed production, new business models, and a better enabling environment. David mentioned the government maybe as a smart purchaser. What role could the government play in terms of in seed subsidies? If seed subsidies are legitimate and relevant, could they also, in the context of a seed subsidy, be a more intelligent buyer? Could they be part of then incentivizing, say, varietal turnover or you know, innovation, you know, for the farmer? So I hope, having said that, you know, rearrange, you know, seed systems and breeding isn't new to the CGIAR, so maybe it's more of an evolution, a very rapid evolution than a revolution. But you know, we have our breeding pipelines. We're not starting from zero. But hopefully what comes out of those breeding pipelines is, as I say, fewer, better varieties. Maybe, you know, maybe we work in an institutional environment where licensing is more uniform, equitable licensing systems. We think much more about how we get seed to disadvantaged groups. Some of the metrics, we really want to innovate, for example, in some of the metrics we want to develop around tracking. Are we really reaching who we want to reach, that in that last mile part and disadvantaged group, including women? So I hope it looked. It's an evolution, a rapid evolution, maybe not a revolution.
Okay, thank you for this further explanation, Ian. Carlo, could you also please reflect on this? What does it really mean for the seed user, this whole reform process? What will change in your view?
Thank you. I mean, I also agree with Ian that this is not just rearranging the chairs, but this is something a little bit deeper and more significant. I think from my perspective and the perspective of the nature positive agriculture, I hope it will mean better quality seeds for crops and varieties. And that goes also on the previous question from Varuna Kari, better seeds and varieties for crops that are generally neglected and not included in any kind of seed activities. It will probably require policy work to allow for some of these crops to have more investment by, for example, national program, but also the CGIAR, because one of the issues that is really the quality of the seed. So by working and to improve this informal seed system and the diversification of the seed system, I think for the practitioner should mean having better quality seeds. So seeds that can fulfill to their potential and so can improve the yield, can improve the nutrition, and crops would not fail. And probably also will mean having access to a more diverse set of crops and maybe also varieties. For example, we are working on policy issues related to the registration of native varieties, land races. And that will be an important point because many farmers are still using this genetic diversity, but they cannot make a business, a livelihood out of it, even when there is the potential because they are somehow illegal. So is it possible, once you have characterized them, purifying them, is it possible to create a register so that these varieties can be available to the farmers who may still like to use them and with the right quality? So to summarize, it will mean more quality for a broader set of crops and varieties.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, there's also a question or remark in the chat that says, well, you can replace obsolete varieties and can focus on fewer, better fit, more well characterized varieties, but at the same time, you want to get a better characterization and a better use and give some market value to the genetic resources that farmers already use, no? Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, that is fundamental. I think at the end, it's really about connecting these farmers to the market, offering them niche market, and really try to make sure that you know, like for example, in Kenya, we're working with flour companies to make composite flour that are more nutrition, gluten-free, healthier, using crops that are a little bit marginalized and including, for example, amaranthus as a vegetable. So really try to diversify, but also linking to the market. And because climate change is fast, and because climate change happens, also having a faster turnover of varieties, no? Because some varieties may lose their adaptive potential very soon as climate keeps changing. So having a faster turnover of varieties that keep pace with an amazing fast climate change.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlo. There's another issue. So we mentioned the importance of partners giving their input also in how seed sector support from CG and collaboration and partnership should involve and perspectives should develop. So somebody's asking, is it already clear when we as partners can give our inputs to this process? Or is this not a clear process yet and we still have to wait? So David, may I ask this question to you?
Sure, you're putting me on the spot. That's a great question. That's a great question to ask. I've actually asked that question of the leadership in CGIAR and the management several times now through my own channels. And the sort of indication I get is this. The CGIAR has had to spend a little time looking inwards on itself before consulting sort of, you know, with stakeholders and partners, both existing and future or potential. Partly because a lot of this reform is, you know, some very large scale behind the scenes governance changes that are designed to really reduce the fragmentation of how CGIAR centers are governed and managed. So, you know, unifying them towards a common purpose. That's not easy stuff to do, but it's also not really stuff that anybody in the outside world necessarily cares about unless they're like a corporate governance expert or a public administration expert or something like that. So honestly, I think the CGIAR has spent a lot of time focusing on those governance and then management type issues that are fairly internal. And it is now, I think, time for CGIAR to start reaching out to its partners beyond the donors that are already involved, and some of the organizations that have been involved in these initiative design teams, like Maria herself, to start, you know, talking about the way forward together. I've already received a number of queries, you know, and requests for information, being here in Rwanda, asking, say, okay, who are your partners in Rwanda? You know, what is the status of their understanding about One CGIAR, and how do you think we should approach them to provide information and get their feedback and engagement? And that's a really good sign because at the regional level, at you know, the specific action area or science level, there's a lot of engagement that has to happen. It is, I think that time is now, or in the next 2 months, we'll start seeing more of that conversation. But I think everybody's been patient up till now, recognizing that getting our own house in order internally was sort of the first order of business, and I think that's what everybody actually did want to see. So now we're going to be more outward looking, I hope.
Okay, thank you so much, David. So it seems we have planned this session exactly at the right time. Yeah, somebody else was asking, like, how, so content-wise, there are a number of issues that will be different in the future, or there will be emphasis on different topics, and that we went through. But institutionally, how does this One CGIAR look like? Can one of you answer that, or is that clear already? Or that's also, how do you go from 15 institutes to one organization? What does that mean? Could one of you elaborate on that, or that's too early? Ian, could I ask you?
Sure. No. Yes. Please ask. Yes. Actually, I did just out of interest, I did just Google One CGIAR. I invite your audience, if you just Google One CGIAR and find the page, there is actually a section there called, quick links, I think it's called, and then questions and answers. Actually, there's quite a lot of detail there around timelines, governance, funding modalities. So if you follow One CGIAR, and I think it's called quick links, and then Q&A, there's actually a lot of detail there around timelines, governance, funding modalities, and that area. So there is information there, and it's quite a transparent process. We, as David said, the early part of his transformation was around governance systems, developing this sort of One CG board. So there is one board, so this at the one, but obviously CG centers still exist as legal entities. Those brands, you imagine, have been built up over a long time. They're very significant. So implementation may happen, but the new seat, they say these three action areas are now in place. The senior management is in place now to the level of the executive management team, but now the science group directors of those three action areas we've been talking about, those three people are now in place. Regional directors are now in place. As David said, it's a matter of weeks. So hence now the regional directors are in place. So consultation, exercises can start and will accelerate over the next 6 months. And on the science portfolio, as I say, there are these initiatives that I'm involved in one of them, Carlo's involved in another, David's involved in a number of them, you're involved in some of those, and ISSD and Wageningen are involved in those, Maya. And they are now in that proposal where those proposals are developed in a series of phases, the first of which have to become live on the 1st of January, 2022. So the first phase of these initiatives, that's the science portfolio, the prospectus, if you like, has to go live, has to go through internal review processes, external review processes, and as part of that process, we will be reaching out to partners, to build those, to build that portfolio. And so, I think as David said, I think it's going to, the whole process will start to look more. It started internal and will start to look much more external over the next 6 months, and then it'll roll on. We're talking about building that portfolio over a number of years up to about 2024. There is information out there.
We have to come to a conclusion because time is almost up, and I would like you to stay here. And because, can you just explain a little bit more on the way forward in this reform process? And I would like to link that to a last question from the audience, who says, do you have any advice on how can they get involved in how can we build partnerships with One CG? And can you link that question on how do we move forward from where we are right now?
Right. So there are two sort of key things happening, I guess. One is, as David mentioned, is this sort of external consultation process. And say regional directors are now in place. There are two who are interim at the moment. There's actually a recruitment process for two of those regional directors, but there are interims for those regions. So one mechanism, and that's part about consultation, checking the demand for what we do. There's an element of matching innovations, that could be on offer to the demand for those innovations at a regional or a national level. That's obviously a really important process that still needs to take place. So one route is through regional directors. The other side, I guess, is on the building of the science portfolio. So there are, as it happens, 33 of these research initiatives actually being built, conceptualized. They're at the concept note stage, and they're moving towards developing proposals as we speak. And that process, for the first phase of those, we don't know exactly how many are in the first phase, but those that are in the first phase have to deliver proposals by the end of September to be able to start implementation on the 1st of January 2022, and then there are second and third phases. So another point of contact is those initiative teams, and the leaders and co-leaders of those teams is another way. But those teams are also, in any case, reaching out or starting to reach out to partners and building up those ideas. So there's two ways in. Say through this regional consultation process and at the level of building some of the science portfolio itself, the prospectus.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. And I think this was a very interesting session. And I hope participants, you have learned more about this One CGIAR process and what may be your role in it and how you can get connected and where you can learn more. Alessandra, I know I put you a bit on the spot, but can you say a few final words to conclude this session?
Okay, you are putting me on the spot. Let's say. Well, for me, of course, I'll emphasize the gender component, because that's, for me, I mean, it's extremely important. And the One CGIAR now has, in fact, progress on gender equality as one of the 5 impact areas. So, I've been in the CG for quite a while already. And, when I joined in 2006, actually, gender work was struggling a little bit. And so we really had to push, to integrate gender. And I think in the last years, we've done huge progress. Now, gender equality is indeed one of the impact areas, as I said, and now we're not just integrating gender considerations in the work that we do, we are in fact leveraging the work that we do to progress on gender equality. So I'm so excited. I think we've mentioned already, and David said as well, that we are working on this paper as well to really reconceptualize how seed systems can be a means to support gender equality. So there's been a shift in the thinking, which I think is excellent, and it's new. So yeah, I actually look forward to engaging with the people here in the group and people in the audience and new partners, really, on making a difference so that we can reach both women and men, livestock keepers and farmers in general, to really enhance their livelihoods and support food and nutrition security with the environment and all of that. So thank you so much for inviting. Beautiful panel. Look forward to continuing to work together.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alessandra. And thank you for really being a leader in this area, which is a necessary area to be addressed. I would like to thank all the panelists for this very interesting discussion. And I know there are more questions in the chat, but we have to close this session. To the participants, I hope you enjoyed it. It was the last session of today. And I hand over to James now.
Thank you very much, Maria, also for leading what was indeed a very enjoyable and interesting session. I think for this session, more than any other today, we've had a great diversity in the audience. It's very clear that this is an important topic that many people want to find out. What does this mean for me? What's going to happen? What can I look forward to? A final word of thanks to all of the panelists. Very informative answers, very fluid and engaging discussion. Thanks very much for being here today. As Maria said, that is, of course, our last session for today. So what I want to do before I hang up is to show here the program for tomorrow. It is day 3 and the final day of our conference, and it is a condensed day. We're live from Central European Summertime 10 until just before 2 o'clock, at which point we hand over to our colleagues in the African Union Commission for the I believe it's the first General Assembly of the African Seed Biotechnology Partnership Platform. And that runs from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock our time, which is 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock Nairobi time. And now that is not hosted on this platform, but we will make the link very easy to find here and on issdafrica.org. A note, a reminder that tomorrow, as today, we have some parallel sessions. So again, please go to issdafrica.org to find the right time and the right place to be for those sessions. If you would like all of this information in your inbox, be sure to subscribe to ISSD Africa. You will see, if you go to issdafrica.org, you will see a big subscribe there on the menu. That's all I have to say for now. Again, a final word of thanks to our panelists, and Maria, to you for hosting this final discussion of the day. I wish everybody a very enjoyable afternoon and evening. Bye-bye for now.